Maya walked through the heavy glass doors of Iron Forge Gym, her worn sneakers squeaking softly against the polished floor. The smell of sweat and rubber mats filled her nostrils as she took in the bustling fitness center. Dozens of people moved. Between weight machines, treadmills hummed with activity and the sound of boxing gloves hitting heavy bags echoed from the far corner. She clutched a small piece of paper with the gym's address, double-checking she was in the right place. After months of working long hours at the accounting firm downtown, Maya had finally decided to join a gym. Her doctor had suggested regular exercise to help with the stress and back pain that came from sitting at a desk for 10 hours a day. Eddie, 28 years old, Maya had always been on the quieter side. She preferred books to parties, tea to coffee, and comfortable silence to small talk. Her colleagues often described her as sweet but forgettable, the kind of person who blended into the background at office meetings. Standing at just 5 feet, 4 inches with a slender build, she looked more like someone who spent her evenings reading novels than someone who belonged in a gym. The reception desk was staffed by a young woman with bright purple hair, who smiled warmly at Maya. "First time here?" she asked, noticing Maya's uncertain expression. "Yes, I called yesterday about membership options," Maya replied softly, tucking a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. "Perfect. Let me get someone to show you around." The receptionist picked up a phone and called for Jake, the head fitness coach. Within minutes, a tall, muscular man approached the desk. Jake Morrison was everything Maya wasn't: loud, confident, and imposing. At 6 feet 2 inches with arms, covered in tattoos, he commanded attention wherever he went. He had been the head coach at Iron Forge for 3 years and took pride in his tough-love approach to training. "So you're the new member," Jake said, looking Maya up and down with barely concealed amusement. "What are your fitness goals?" "Let me guess. Lose a few pounds, tone up a little, maybe try some yoga classes." Maya nodded quietly. "Something like that. I mostly want to get stronger and maybe learn some self-defense." Jake chuckled and crossed his arms. "Self-defense, huh? Well, we do have some cardio kickboxing classes that might be more your speed. The real martial arts classes can get pretty intense." He gestured toward a group of women in colorful workout clothes following along to upbeat music in a mirrored studio. "Actually, I was hoping to try something more practical," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or something similar." This time Jake laughed outright, causing several nearby gym members to turn and look. "Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Listen, sweetheart, BJJ isn't exactly for everyone. It's a tough sport that requires real commitment and strength. Most people who look like you end up quitting after a week or two when they realize what they've gotten themselves into." Maya felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she maintained her composure. "I understand it's challenging. That's exactly what I'm looking for." Jake shook his head, still grinning. "Tell you what, we do have a beginner's BJJ class on Tuesday evenings. But I'm warning you now, it's not like those Hollywood movies where tiny people magically beat up big guys. This is real martial arts with real contact. You sure you don't want to start with something easier? Maybe Pilates?" "I'd like to try the Jiu-Jitsu class," Maya insisted, though her voice remained soft and polite. "Your funeral," Jake said with a shrug. "The instructor is Marcus Chen. Good luck lasting more than one session." He handed her a class schedule and walked away, already forgetting about the quiet woman who clearly had no idea what she was getting herself into. Maya spent the rest of the afternoon filling out paperwork and getting familiar with the gym layout. She noticed how Jake interacted with other members, encouraging and supportive with the muscular men, flirtatious with attractive women, and dismissive with anyone he deemed unworthy of his attention. When Tuesday evening arrived, Maya changed into a simple white t-shirt and black athletic shorts in the women's locker room. Her hands trembled slightly as she tied her hair back into a ponytail. It had been a long time since she had put herself in such a vulnerable position, and Jake's words from earlier in the week echoed in her mind. The BJJ training area was separated from the main gym by thick mats covering the floor and walls. About 15 people were already warming up when Maya arrived, most of them wearing white, blue, or purple belts around their waists. The instructor, Marcus Chen, was a compact man in his 40s with kind eyes and calloused hands. "You must be Maya," Marcus said, approaching her with a genuine smile. "Welcome to our little family. Don't worry about not having a GI yet. We'll start you with some basic movements and see how you feel." Jake happened to be walking past the training area when he spotted Maya sitting on the edge of the mats, looking nervous and out of place among the more experienced students. He stopped and called out loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Hey Marcus, looks like you got yourself a real warrior there," Jake said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Better take it easy on her. She might break if you look at her wrong." Several students turned to look at Maya, who kept her eyes focused on her hands. She had dealt with people like Jake her entire life. Bullies who mistook quietness for weakness, who assumed that because she didn't speak up, she couldn't stand up for herself. Marcus frowned at Jake's comment but didn't respond directly. Instead, he turned to Maya and spoke in an encouraging tone. "Everyone starts somewhere. The most important thing is showing up and being willing to learn." As the class began with basic warm-up exercises, Maya followed along quietly, focusing on each movement and listening carefully to Marcus's instructions. She noticed that several other students seemed to be watching her, probably wondering if she would quit before the hour was up. Jake lingered near the entrance, occasionally making comments to other gym members about how the little mouse wouldn't last 5 minutes once the real training started. He seemed to take particular pleasure in pointing out every time Maya struggled with a movement or looked uncertain about a technique. But Maya continued training, absorbing every piece of instruction, like a sponge. Her movements were careful and precise, and while she didn't say much, her eyes never stopped watching and learning. Something about the way she carried herself on the mats was different from her usual quiet demeanor. There was a subtle confidence that hadn't been there before. As the class progressed, Maya found herself remembering movements and techniques that felt strangely familiar, as if her body was recalling something her mind had temporarily forgotten. The following Tuesday, Maya returned to Ironforge Gym with a small black bag slung over her shoulder. Inside was a crisp white GI that she had ordered online, along with a white belt. She had spent the weekend watching YouTube videos and reading about basic Jiu-Jitsu techniques, trying to prepare herself for her second class. Jake was behind the front desk when she walked in, talking loudly to another trainer about his weekend adventures. He glanced up as Maya passed by, a smirk crossing his face. Well, look who came back for round 2, he called out, loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. "I'm honestly surprised. Most people like you don't make it past the first class. How badly did Marcus beat you up last week?" Maya paused and turned to face him, her expression calm and polite. "The class was very informative. I'm looking forward to learning more." Jake laughed and shook his head. "Informative? Lady, this isn't a college lecture. Wait until you actually have to roll with someone who knows what they're doing. Then we'll see how informative you find it when you're tapping out every 30 seconds. The other trainer, a woman named Sarah, looked uncomfortable with Jake's behavior. "Come on, man, give her a chance. Everyone starts somewhere." "Oh, I'm giving her a chance," Jake replied, still grinning. "I'm just being realistic about what's going to happen. Some people are cut out for combat sports and some people are cut out for book clubs. Nothing wrong with knowing which category you fall into." Maya didn't respond to his comments. Instead, she simply nodded politely and continued toward the changing room. But as she walked away, something flickered in her eyes. A brief flash of something that might have been annoyance or perhaps something stronger. In the women's locker room, Maya changed into her new gi with practiced efficiency. Her movements were smooth and automatic, as if she had done this routine thousands of times before. She tied her white belt with precise, even loops, and for just a moment, her fingers hesitated on the knot as if remembering a different color belt entirely. When she emerged onto the training mats, several students from the previous week greeted her warmly. Marcus smiled when he saw her properly dressed in a gi. "Looking good, Maya. Ready to learn some new techniques tonight?" "Yes, sir," she replied quietly, taking her place among the other white belts for warm-up exercises. Jake had positioned himself near the BJJ area again, this time bringing a protein shake and making himself comfortable on a nearby bench. He appeared to be checking his phone, but Maya noticed that his attention kept drifting to the training session. Tonight we're going to work on basic guard positions and escapes, Marcus announced to the class. Maya, since this is only your second class, I'll partner you with Jennifer. She's been training for about 6 months and can help guide you through the movements. Jennifer was a friendly woman in her 30s wearing a blue belt. She had the lean, athletic build of someone who had been consistently training for several years. As they paired off, she smiled encouragingly at Maya. Don't worry about making mistakes, Jennifer said as they sat facing each other on the mats. I remember my first few months, I felt like I had no idea what I was doing most of the time. They began working through the basic movements Marcus demonstrated. Maya followed Jennifer's guidance carefully, asking quiet questions and listening intently to the explanations. But as they continued drilling the techniques, something interesting began to happen. Maya's movements started to flow more naturally. Her body positioning improved dramatically, and she began anticipating the next steps before Jennifer could guide her through them. When they switched roles and Maya was supposed to be the one escaping from guard position, her transitions were surprisingly smooth and technically sound. Wow, Jennifer said after Maya executed a particularly clean escape. Are you sure you've never done this before? That was really good. I'm just trying to focus on what Marcus showed us, Maya replied modestly, but there was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't telling the complete truth. From his bench, Jake was beginning to pay more attention. He had expected to see Maya struggling with the basic movements, perhaps getting overwhelmed or frustrated. Instead, she seemed to be picking up the techniques faster than most beginners he had observed. Beginner's luck, he muttered to himself, taking another sip of his protein shake. As the class progressed, Marcus had everyone rotate partners to practice with different people. Maya found herself working with David, a stocky man wearing a purple belt who had been training for about 4 years. Go easy on her, Marcus instructed David. She's brand new, so just let her work through the movements slowly. David nodded and assumed the starting position. But as they began drilling, he quickly realized that Maya needed less guidance than expected. Her grips were strong and properly placed, her balance was excellent, and her timing was surprisingly precise. Have you done any other martial arts? David asked during a brief water break. A little when I was younger, Maya answered vaguely, not elaborating further. Jake couldn't help but overhear this exchange, and his interest was piqued. There was something about Maya's demeanor on the mats that didn't match her quiet, uncertain personality in the rest of the gym. He decided to get closer to observe her training more carefully. During the final drilling session of the evening, Marcus announced that they would work on basic submissions, specifically arm bars from guard position. This was more advanced than what most white belts would typically learn in their second class, but the group had been progressing well. Maya partnered with a blue belt named Chris, a young man who had been training for about 2 years. Marcus demonstrated the technique slowly, breaking it down into individual steps. The most important thing is controlling your partner's posture, Marcus explained, showing how to break down the opponent's base before attempting the submission. Without proper control, the submission won't work. As Maya and Chris began practicing, something remarkable happened. Maya's execution of the armbar was not just competent, it was textbook perfect. Her angles were precise, her leverage was flawless, and her control was so tight that Chris couldn't escape even when he tried to resist. Okay, that was way too good, Chris said, looking puzzled. Seriously, where did you train before? Before Maya could answer, Jake stepped onto the edge of the mats, his expression now more curious than mocking. Marcus, can I borrow your new student for a minute? Jake asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Marcus looked surprised but nodded. Sure. What did you have in mind? Jake smiled, but it wasn't entirely friendly. I just want to see what she's really got. Mind if I roll with her for a couple of minutes? Nothing too intense, just some light sparring to see how she handles pressure. The training area grew quiet as other students sensed the tension in Jake's request. Maya looked up at him calmly, showing no sign of nervousness or excitement. I don't think that's necessary, Marcus interjected. Maya is still learning the basics. But Maya stood up slowly, her movements fluid and confident. For the first time since joining the gym, she looked Jake directly in the eyes. It's okay, she said quietly. I don't mind. The entire training area fell silent as Maya and Jake faced each other on the center of the mat. Other students stopped their own drilling to watch what was about to unfold. Marcus looked concerned, knowing that Jake was known for being overly aggressive with beginners, especially when he felt the need to prove a point. Jake stood 6 feet 2 inches and weighed around 220 pounds of solid muscle. He had trained in various martial arts for over a decade, including boxing, wrestling, and some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, though he had never been particularly dedicated to any single discipline. His approach to combat sports was more about power and intimidation than technique. Maya, in contrast, appeared almost fragile next to him. Her slender frame and quiet demeanor made the size difference even more pronounced. But as she adjusted her GI and retied her belt, there was something different about her posture, a subtle shift in her energy that few people noticed. "Okay, nothing too crazy here," Marcus announced to the watching students. "Just some light positional sparring. Jake, remember she's brand new to this." Jake nodded, but his expression suggested he had other plans. "Don't worry, I'll take it. Easy on her. Just want to see how she handles a little pressure." He crouched down into a basic grappling stance, his movements confident but somewhat sloppy. Years of relying on his size and strength had made him less focused on proper technique. He reached forward to grab Maya's collar, intending to use his weight advantage to immediately dominate the position. What happened next surprised everyone in the room, including Jake himself. Maya moved with sudden, fluid precision. She slipped Jake's initial grab, controlled his wrist, and in one smooth motion used his forward momentum against him. Before Jake realized what was happening, he found himself off balance and being guided toward the mat. But Maya wasn't finished. As Jake tried to recover his footing, she maintained her grip on his arm and stepped through with perfect timing. Jake felt himself being lifted and thrown, his feet leaving the ground as Maya executed a textbook hip toss that sent him crashing onto his back. The impact knocked the wind out of Jake's lungs, and he lay stunned for a moment, staring up at the ceiling. The training area was completely silent except for the sound of his labored breathing. Maya stood calmly above him, not gloating or celebrating, but simply waiting to see if he wanted to continue. Her expression remained neutral, almost apologetic, as if she was sorry for what had just happened. "Lucky shot," Jake gasped, rolling over and getting back to his feet. His face was red. Whether from exertion or embarrassment wasn't clear. "Let's try that again." Marcus started to intervene. "Maybe we should call it there. Maya's done enough for her second class." But Jake waved him off. No, I'm fine. Just caught me off guard. Let's see if she can do it twice." This time, Jake was more cautious in his approach. He kept his center of gravity lower and tried to use his wrestling background to shoot for Maya's legs, intending to take her down with brute force. Maya had been expecting this. As Jake dove forward, she sprawled backward, keeping her hips away from his grasping hands. But instead of simply defending, she immediately countered. Her hands found the back of Jake's neck, and she used his downward momentum to pull him into a front headlock position. Before Jake could react, Maya had stepped around to his side and was applying pressure to force him down to the mat. He tried to muscle his way out of the position, using his strength advantage to stand back up, but Maya adjusted her grip and maintained perfect leverage. Within seconds, Jake found himself face down on the mat with Maya controlling his head and one arm. He struggled against her control, but every movement he made seemed to only make her position stronger. Okay, Jake said, tapping his free hand against the mat in submission. He was breathing heavily and his face was flushed with frustration. Maya immediately released the hold and stepped back, offering her hand to help him up. "Good roll," she said quietly, as if nothing unusual had happened. Jake ignored her offered hand and got to his feet on his own. He brushed off his shorts and tried to regain his composure, but it was clear that he was rattled by what had just occurred. "Not bad," he admitted grudgingly. "You might actually have some potential after all." But privately, Jake was troubled by what he had just experienced. Maya's techniques weren't just good for a beginner, they were good, period. Her timing, leverage, and positional awareness were at a level that typically took years of dedicated training to develop. As the class wound down and students began changing out of their GIs, Jake pulled Marcus aside. "Where did you say she trained?" "Before?" Jake asked, trying to sound casual. Marcus shrugged. "She didn't really give me any details, just mentioned that she had done a little martial arts when she was younger." "Why?" Jake watched Maya as she quietly gathered her things and prepared to leave. "I don't know, man. Something doesn't add up. Nobody moves like that after 2 classes, no matter how naturally gifted they are." Meanwhile, several students approached Maya to compliment her on her performance. Jennifer, her first training partner, looked amazed. "That was incredible. I can't believe you just started training." "You made it look so easy," Maya smiled modestly. "Jake is probably just tired from a long day of training. I got lucky." But Chris, the blue belt who had been working submissions with her earlier, wasn't buying the humble act. "Come on, be honest with us. You've trained before, haven't you?" "That wasn't luck. That was technique." Maya paused in packing her gear, seeming to consider how much she wanted to reveal. "I did train when I was younger," she admitted. "But it was a long time ago, and I'm pretty rusty." "How long ago?" David, the purple belt, asked curiously. "High school and college," Maya replied vaguely. "I took a long break after that to focus on my career." Jake, who had been listening to this conversation from across the room, felt a growing suspicion. Maya's story didn't quite fit with what he had just witnessed. People didn't maintain that level of technical skill after years away from training, especially not the kind of precise, high-level technique she had just demonstrated. As Maya left the gym that evening, Jake was already formulating a plan. He was going to find out exactly who this quiet woman really was and what she was hiding. His pride had been wounded by the embarrassing defeat, and he was determined to prove that it had been nothing more than a fluke. But what Jake didn't know was that Maya's past in martial arts was far more extensive and accomplished than anyone at Iron Forge Gym could have imagined. Her years of taking a break had been a deliberate choice to leave that part of her life behind. But stepping back onto the mats had awakened something she thought she had buried forever. As she drove home through the quiet streets, Maya found herself thinking about the feeling of moving and flowing on the mats again. It had felt natural, almost like coming home after a long journey. But it also brought back memories she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. The next morning, Maya returned to her routine of heading to the accounting office, sitting at her desk, and blending into the background of corporate life. But something had shifted inside her, and she found it difficult to focus on spreadsheets and financial reports when her mind kept drifting back to the previous evening's training session. Jake Morrison was not someone who easily let things go, especially when his ego had been bruised. Over the next few days, he found himself obsessing over his encounter with Maya. He replayed the brief sparring session in his mind repeatedly, analyzing every moment and trying to understand how a seemingly inexperienced woman had so effortlessly outmaneuvered him. His first instinct was to dismiss it as a lucky break, but the more he thought about it, the less that explanation made sense. Maya's movements had been too precise, too calculated, and too technically sound to be the result of chance or natural talent alone. On Thursday evening, Jake decided to do some investigating. He started by asking around the gym about Maya, but none of the other staff members knew much about her, beyond the basic information she had provided when signing up for membership. Her emergency contact form listed only a work number, and her address was a modest apartment complex across town. Frustrated by the lack of information available through normal channels, Jake turned to social media. He found Maya's Facebook profile, but it revealed little beyond the occasional post about books she was reading or restaurants she had visited. Her photos showed a quiet, unremarkable life focused on work and solitary activities. But Jake was persistent. He expanded his search, looking through old posts and tagged photos going back several years. Most of what he found confirmed the impression of Maya as a bookish, introverted woman who preferred staying home to going out. Then, buried deep in her timeline from nearly 8 years ago, Jake found something interesting. It was a single photo that someone else had tagged her in, showing a group of young women in martial arts uniforms holding trophies. The image quality was poor and the participants looked much younger, but Jake was almost certain that one of the women was Maya. The Kiao Photo had been posted by someone named Lisa Chen with the caption, "Congratulations to our regional champions." So proud of these amazing athletes. Jake clicked on Lisa Chen's profile and began scrolling through her posts. Lisa appeared to be a martial arts instructor who ran several different programs. Her recent posts showed her teaching children's karate classes and adult self-defense workshops, but older content revealed involvement in competitive Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Going back several years in Lisa's timeline, Jake found more photos from various tournaments and training camps. In many of them, he spotted someone who looked remarkably like Maya, though usually wearing a GI and often holding medals or trophies. One photo in particular caught his attention. It showed a young woman receiving a black belt from an elderly Brazilian man who appeared to be a high-ranking instructor. The ceremony looked formal and important, with dozens of people watching from the background. While the image was several years old and the angle made it difficult to be completely certain, Jake was increasingly convinced that the recipient was Maya. The caption read, "Congratulations to Maya Santos on earning her black belt under Professor Roberto Silva. Well deserved after years of dedication and hard work." Jake stared at the screen, his mouth falling open. A black belt under Professor Roberto Silva? Even Jake, with his limited knowledge of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, recognized that name. Roberto Silva was a legendary figure in the martial arts world, a multiple-time world champion who only awarded black belts to the most exceptional students. But the revelations didn't stop there. As Jake continued digging through the archives, he found evidence of an even more impressive competitive record. There were photos from national tournaments, international competitions, and training camps with world-famous fighters. In several images, Maya appeared to be competing at the highest levels of the sport. The most shocking discovery came when Jake found a newspaper article from 5 years ago. The headline read, "Local woman wins National Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Championship." The accompanying photo clearly showed Maya holding a large trophy, wearing a gold medal around her neck, and smiling broadly at the camera. According to the article, Maya Santos had defeated some of the top-ranked fighters in her weight division to claim the national title. The reporter described her as a technical prodigy, with an unorthodox but devastatingly effective fighting style that had puzzled opponents throughout the tournament. Jake leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. The quiet, unassuming woman who had joined his gym was not only an experienced martial artist, she was a national champion, someone who had competed at the highest levels of the sport and defeated elite-level opponents. But this raised even more questions. Why was Maya hiding her background? Why was she pretending to be a beginner when she clearly possessed skills that surpassed most people in the gym, including Jake himself? And why had she stopped competing if she was so successful? Jake's initial embarrassment at being out-grappled by Maya was now transforming into something else entirely. He felt foolish for having underestimated her so badly, but he also felt manipulated. Maya had deliberately concealed her true abilities and allowed him to make assumptions about her that were completely false. The more Jake thought about it, the more frustrated he became. He had been trying to be helpful by steering Maya away from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu classes, genuinely believing that she would be overwhelmed and potentially hurt by the intensity of real martial arts training. Instead, she had been quietly laughing at his ignorance while possessing skills that far exceeded his own. Jake decided that he wasn't going to let Maya continue her charade. He wanted answers, and he wanted them publicly. If she was going to make him look like a fool, then he was going to expose her deception for everyone at the gym to see. The next Tuesday evening, Jake made sure to arrive at the gym early. He positioned himself near the BJJ training area and waited for Maya to arrive for class. When she walked in wearing her simple white gi and white belt, Jake felt his anger flare again at the sight of her deliberate deception. Maya went through her usual routine of quiet preparation, stretching and warming up alongside the other students. She nodded politely to the people she had trained with the previous week and listened attentively as Marcus began explaining the evening's techniques. About halfway through the class, Jake couldn't contain himself any longer. He stepped onto the edge of the mats and called out loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Hey Maya, can I ask you a question?" The training stopped as everyone turned to look at Jake. Maya looked up from where she had been drilling with Jennifer, her expression curious but wary. "Sure," she replied quietly. Jake pulled out his phone and held up the screen, showing one of the photos he had found online. "Is this you winning the National Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Championship 5 years ago?" The training area fell completely silent. Maya stared at the phone screen for a long moment, her face showing no emotion. Marcus looked confused, glancing back and forth between Jake and Maya. "Where did you get that?" Maya asked, her voice still calm but with a subtle edge that hadn't been there before. "Does it matter where I got it?" Jake replied, his voice rising. "The question is why you've been lying to everyone here about who you are and what you can do." Other gym members began gathering around the edges of the training area, drawn by the confrontation. Word spread quickly through the gym that something dramatic was happening in the BJJ section. Maya stood up slowly, her movements still fluid and controlled. For the first time since joining the gym, she looked directly at Jake with an expression that held no trace of the timid uncertainty she had previously shown. "I never lied to anyone," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I said I had done some martial arts when I was younger. I said I was rusty. Both of those things are true." "Rusty?" Jake laughed harshly. "You threw me around like I was a child, and you call that rusty? You're a national champion pretending to be a beginner. How is that not lying?" The tension in the training area was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every person in Iron Forge Gym seemed to have gathered around the BJJ mats, creating a circle of curious faces watching the confrontation unfold. Maya stood in the center, no longer the quiet, apologetic woman who had first walked through the gym doors 2 weeks ago. Marcus stepped forward, trying to diffuse the situation. "Look, maybe we should take this conversation somewhere more private. There's no need to air this out in front of everyone." But Jake was beyond reasonable discussion. The discovery of Maya's true identity had wounded his pride even deeper than their sparring session had. He felt like he had been made a fool of, not just in front of his colleagues, but in front of the entire gym community where he had worked hard to establish his reputation as a knowledgeable and respected trainer. "No, I think everyone deserves to know who they've been training with," Jake said, holding up his phone again to show more photos he had found. Maya Santos, multiple-time national champion, world tournament medalist, black belt under Roberto Silva himself. And she's been sitting here for 2 weeks pretending she doesn't know how to tie her belt properly. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people processed this information. Some looked impressed, others confused, and a few appeared angry at having been deceived. Maya remained silent, her expression unreadable as she absorbed the accusations being thrown at her. "You want to know what I think?" Jake continued, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. "I think you came here specifically to embarrass people. I think this is some kind of game to you, watching us fumble around trying to teach you things you already know better than we do." "That's not true," Maya said quietly, but her words were lost in Jake's continued rant. "And then when I offered to roll with you, trying to be helpful, trying to give you some real experience, you decided to humiliate me in front of everyone. Well, congratulations, Maya. You got your laugh. Hope it was worth it." The crowd was getting restless, with some people calling out questions and others expressing their opinions about the situation. The atmosphere was becoming increasingly hostile, and Maya could feel dozens of eyes staring at her with suspicion and judgment. Finally, Maya had heard enough. She walked to the center of the mat and held up her hand for silence. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority and confidence that no one at the gym had heard from her before. "You want to know the truth? Fine. Yes, I used to compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Yes, I was successful at it. And yes, I deliberately chose not to advertise that fact when I joined this gym." She paused, looking around at the faces surrounding her. "I stopped competing 5 years ago after winning nationals because I was burned out. The constant pressure, the training, the politics of competitive martial arts, it consumed my entire life for nearly a decade. I needed to step away and find out who I was outside of fighting." Jake scoffed. "So you decided to come slumming with us regular people?" Maya's eyes flashed with anger for the first time. "I came here because I missed the physical challenge and the mental discipline that martial arts provides. I wanted to train, again, But I also wanted to do it without the baggage of my past accomplishments. I wanted to see if I could rediscover my love for the art itself, not just the winning. By lying to everyone? By being a student again instead of a teacher or a celebrity, Maya shot back. Do you have any idea what it's like to walk into a gym and have everyone either treat you like some kind of superhero or immediately challenge